Hi everyone. What follows will be videos of what was in my little book, Rebreathing. Short videos, more digestible, and at times updated with more recent research. Important to me here is that everyone can comment after each video, as it becomes more of a collaboration. I was clear in my writing that my suggestions were not claims, but merely suggestions or speculation, yet to be proven. I had hoped that some in the medical profession may consider that these ideas were worthy of further research. My book was about SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. What are the factors that may lead to these tragedies, and what are some of the practices that may help avoid these happening? Much of this is well known, well researched, and available online. I just add my take to some of these issues. I assume that many of you know what rebreathing is. Rebreathing occurs when an infant's breathing is confined or restricted due to bedding or a soft toy, and the infant rebreathes their own exhaled air rather than inhaling fresh new air. Many doctors believe that this is one of the most significant factors, among others, that lead to SIDS deaths. Most cribs and newest baby monitors are designed around avoiding rebreathing. So going forward, after first dealing with how rebreathing can lead to other outcomes, I will cover other issues concerning SIDS, such as thumb sucking, pacifier use, the autonomic system, fetal hemoglobin, the Safe to Sleep program, as well as some research that I personally completed connecting rebreathing to Alzheimer's. So having set the stage, let's now move on. How can rebreathing cause other outcomes? Now, one of the elements of rebreathing that is somewhat unsettled is the time element. Some may consider it to be a sudden or abrupt cessation of oxygen to the infant, like drowning or suffocation, while others, like myself, consider it to be a process taking more time. It takes time for the oxygen to become depleted and the carbon dioxide to accumulate. The permeability of the obstruction, be it a toy or blanket, as it lets some oxygen through, will lengthen that time. Other factors affecting time could be the age of the infant, the strength of the breathing, the sensitivity of their autonomic system to arousal, the level of ventilation in the room, the presence of secondhand smoke or viruses, and so on. My consideration here is that if a SIDS tragedy is avoided because the infant is aroused or picked up just before rebreathing results in a SIDS death, could there be other consequences due to the depleted rebreathing to that point in time? Taken as an example, if a particular infant under certain circumstances would result in a SIDS death after 15 minutes of rebreathing, what would be the outcome be if they were aroused at 12, 13, or 14 minutes of rebreathing? Could that rebreathing cause any other outcomes to the infant's brain or interfere with its development? I don't know how it couldn't, but that's just my opinion. Just as survivors of drownings can suffer some brain damage depending on how long it took to revive them, could not rebreathing similarly suffer some other consequences? My suggestion here is in some cases, perhaps in many cases, learning disabilities could be those other outcomes, possibly even autism in the severest of cases. So I hope I've explained myself well enough. What do you think? Do you think that rebreathing is limited to just SIDS death, or could it have other outcomes? Even if SIDS death due to rebreathing is sudden, could there not also be other consequences or outcomes other than death? Please comment below at the end of this video and join the conversation. Just want to read something here that I wrote back in 2009 as part of the first chapter. For the purpose of this writing, the words disability, exceptionality, and disorder are often used interchangeably as they refer to outcomes of rebreathing. Consider, for an example, that many who are autistic don't consider it a disability. The use of these words is not meant in any way to judge negatively about any condition. There is never an intent to offend. So I prefer the word exceptionality as it refers to outcomes that make us different, and often it's these differences that make us better as a person. So I had mentioned interfere with development. What did I mean by that? I believe that the growth of billions of neurons, followed by their interconnections to complete the working, healthy brain, follows a genetically preset order. This continues until an individual is in their 20s. However, most of that development occurs during the weeks immediately prior to birth and through infancy. I believe there is a progressive order to that development, and that any detrimental occurrences during that time have life-changing and lifelong consequences. My consideration here is that any interference during a particular time of that development may result in outcomes relative to that time. As an example, a rebreathing episode in the first month of infancy may result in autism, while a similar rebreathing episode in the 8th month may result in dyslexia. Now, this is just a made-up example to make my point. The timing of a rebreathing event may be as important as the severity of the event. Also, multiple episodes of rebreathing may be the cause of multiple disabilities. However, rebreathing may be just one of many factors that lead to other outcomes. Fetal alcohol syndrome is one. A compromised umbilical cord may be another, as well as a difficult or protracted delivery. The health, nutrition, and drugs taken by the mother certainly are significantly important. Did the mother suffer a physical accident or an infection or a virus that could have led to the creation of specific antibodies? Was the baby premature or underweight? There's a long list of factors that can lead to autism, learning disabilities, and other outcomes, of which rebreathing is just one. I had written that some stillbirths may have been due to a compromised umbilical cord with a reduced supply of oxygen to the fetus, and as such could possibly be considered similar to a SIDS death. Likewise, many outcomes can be considered as originating during pregnancy. You know, we keep hearing the dichotomy nature, nurture, nature, nurture, but that isn't the whole story. There's a third and perhaps most significant player in how we turn out the way we do. That is those consequential incidents that occur during the early, vulnerable, and formative months. We need a name for that third element so that it becomes part of the narrative. Could it be incidental? In other words, nature, nurture, incidental? I don't know. Certainly not for me to decide, but it's important. You may think that I've focused on rebreathing, but I would just like it to be considered within the broader and more complex issues that drive those characteristics and qualities that we become. You know, much has been gleaned out of the stats from twins, identical and fraternal. These stats point to genetics as a significant cause of many outcomes, like autism. However, I believe this is a misdirection or an overstatement. Many of the outcomes that are similar due to this third element having bearing because the fetuses share the same resources of the mother and suffer the same detrimental influences throughout pregnancy. They may even share practices that lead to rebreathing as infants. In other words, outcomes that may be considered as genetic may only be due to the fact that both twins, either as a fetus or an infant, suffer the same consequential influences or incidences. This video has gone on a bit longer than I had expected, but I want to get in those ideas, and I'm going to have one more. This is the last footnote on the last page of my book. Could the recent drop in overall crime have been caused by the Back to Sleep campaign, which not only reduced SIDS, but also inadvertently reduced learning disabilities? See, there had been a lot of theorizing about why there has been a drop in the crime rate starting in the 1990s. Others had come to the theory that it was due to the Roe versus Wade decision in the 1990s, which enabled poorer women to afford abortions. They were blaming the high crime rate on poor women having babies. I find that absurd and rather offensive. They overlooked that the other initiative that took place in the early 1990s was the introduction of the Back to Sleep program, now called the Safe to Sleep program or positioning. In my view, I believe that not only did that campaign result in a reduction of SIDS deaths, but also a reduction of autism, learning disabilities, and possibly including some mental illnesses. And because of the avoidance of these detrimental outcomes, there was a reduction in the violent crime rate. In my view, doctors should stand and take a bow. They have achieved much more than a reduction in SIDS deaths. They deserve the credit, in my opinion. So what I wish to cover now is how the practice of thumb sucking or pacifier use can be related to SIDS and rebreathing. You may or may not know, but statistics have shown that there is about an 80 to 90% reduction in the incidence of SIDS for infants who suck their thumb or use pacifiers. Now that is significant. The question is why? Well, there are other theories, but my contention here is that these practices prevent rebreathing, and since they prevent rebreathing, they prevent SIDS occurring. So how can these practices, thumb sucking or pacifier use, prevent rebreathing? There are two main ways that this might be the case. The first is that the fist or pacifier is in front of the infant's face, preventing the infant sleeping face down, prone. It's too uncomfortable. And they turn their head to the side, which is more comfortable and relatively safer. Also, the fist and pacifier may leave some space between the nose and bedding, enabling improved air circulation. The other is that these practices force an infant to breathe through their nose rather than through their mouth, which is more efficient. Now there's two effects. One is the Venturi effect, whereby the exhaled air leaving the nose draws air in from the sides of the nose to be inhaled. The other is that the nose breathing results in a jet of air, of exhaled air, that can be blown further away from the face, as opposed to the slow-moving mouth breathing. And the result is there's fresher air for the child to breathe. Anyways, enough with fluid dynamics. Either way, this shows how rebreathing can be considered prevented by these practices, and so doing prevent SIDS. So an important concern here is that excuses are not found to avoid the practice of thumb sucking or pacifier use. My concern here is that boys may be prevented more than girls, and this might account for why boys more than girls suffer SIDS outcomes. Now, I haven't found any statistics on the practice other than that boys and girls practice thumb sucking at birth equally. But after age 2, girls more than boys will continue the practice. The question remains, are boys more than girls discouraged or prevented from thumb sucking or using a pacifier while they are infants, particularly during the first 8 months of infancy? Now, I have not found any statistics on this issue, but I believe it's important. So what are some of the attitudes that drive the adoption or avoidance of these practices? Now, here I'm generalizing. Now, I've read that some consider thumb sucking or to be girlish or babyish. What does that mean? Pacifiers are also called soothers. Do some consider that it's okay for girls, but not for boys who need to toughen up? In other words, boys get tough Tonka toys while girls get dolls. Boys get footballs and toy guns. Girls get playhouses and play kitchens. In other words, are girls being prepared to be caregivers while boys to be strong, emotion-free, protectors and defenders in a violent world? Now, I'm not talking about my attitude. I'm generalizing some other considered attitudes. And at the extreme, do some consider that thumb sucking leads to homosexuality? Now, I don't believe that, but that doesn't mean that others don't. Now, there are many other issues considered related to thumb sucking and pacifier use, such as teeth overbite, ear infections, protection against allergies, boys' lack of facial expressions, and much more. If it hasn't already been done, this whole area is probably worthy of a thesis, but not for me. I just wish I knew the statistics that compare thumb sucking or pacifier use between girls and boys during the first 8 months of infancy. I haven't found it. Since the dangers of a SIDS death decline over time, one might expect that the most dangerous time is immediately after birth. But that's not the case. There is an anomaly. The most dangerous time for SIDS occurring is from the 2nd to 4th months. Why does there appear to be some protection against SIDS for the first 2 months? My response to that is that fetal hemoglobin might possibly provide some measure of protection. Fetal hemoglobin is at its highest during the first months of infancy, but it is declining while adult hemoglobin is increasing. So it's fair of you to ask, what does fetal hemoglobin have to do with rebreathing? Well, fetal hemoglobin has greater affinity to oxygen, as oxygen binds more easily to fetal hemoglobin. Is it possible that fetal hemoglobin will still be able to acquire sufficient oxygen from the lungs, even when oxygen in the lungs is depleted to dangerous levels due to rebreathing, while adult hemoglobin would be less successful? It's a theory, unproven and even untested, but it might explain how an infant can be protected from SIDS for the first 2 months if rebreathing is an issue. I'm not a doctor, but I would like to hear from anyone in the medical profession who could comment on whether this idea might even be an outside possibility. In the switchover from fetus to an independent infant, the infant's autonomic system has to adjust, and doctors consider that this adjustment, this transition, accounts for the vulnerability from the 2nd to the 4th month. Hemoglobin is part of that changeover and possibly explains how rebreathing might be implicated. Another anomaly for SIDS is the unexpected overheating of the infant. Heating and breathing are part of this autonomic system. Is it possible that during this transition period for the autonomic system, some synesthesia is occurring, where one sense produces outcomes in another? As a possible example, in response to excessive carbon dioxide in the lungs due to rebreathing, rather than improving breathing, the autonomic system increases heating instead. It gives the wrong response. Or the opposite. Is it possible that when an infant becomes overheated due to excessive bedding or clothing, that the autonomic system incorrectly responds by reducing breathing volume or rate? Another important part of this autonomic system is swallowing. Yes, we have to include thumb sucking within the autonomic system. Is it possible that those fetuses and infants who automatically practice thumb sucking at birth have helped accelerate the development of the autonomic system overall, and that this development helps improve breathing and temperature control, protecting the child against SIDS and other outcomes? Yes, maybe this is what results in reduced incidence of SIDS due to thumb sucking, and not rebreathing. Have I not just blown apart my whole theory of rebreathing? Perhaps in part, but all the ideas I put forward here are to encourage creative thought and possible discoveries of new avenues of thinking, some of which may eventually stand up to proof as we break away from old narratives. I make no claims. These ideas are more do you think questions rather than set theories, as I listen and stay open to new fresh ideas. My challenge to you is to challenge me, right or wrong. It's a conversation, a dialogue. I could go one more. Some consider that prone sleeping possibly results in the collapse of the upper airways of the infants, which leads to SIDS. Maybe, maybe not. Perhaps in the prone position, the neck tilted back pinches the medulla, and slow blood flow results in interference in breathing and temperature control of the autonomic system. Anyways, moving on. When I initially wrote my book, swaddling was considered by all to prevent SIDS. I went against that thinking and explained how swaddling could lead to a SIDS outcome. Since then, some in the medical profession have concluded that it can lead to SIDS, certainly not due to reading my work. I was thinking of covering swaddling next, but thought instead of switching over to the relationship between rebreathing and Alzheimer's, which may be of more interest. It's fair view to ask how adults practice rebreathing or depleted rebreathing, and how can this rebreathing be at all related to Alzheimer's? The consideration here is that individuals can practice depleted rebreathing simply by sleeping with their heads underneath their covers and blankets. This creates a microenvironment whereby exhaled air is being continually rebreathed in this confined space, resulting in a reduction of oxygen and an increase of carbon dioxide over time. Is it possible that this reduction of oxygen over years of practice may result in Alzheimer's? This is a theory that can be explored simply by testing whether there is any statistical relationship between the practice of sleeping with the head under the covers and the incidence of Alzheimer's. So I did a short survey, taking a sample of about 500 individuals, many of whom had Alzheimer's or who were caring for someone who was suffering from Alzheimer's. This survey compared different levels of sleeping practice from totally covered to totally exposed to fresh air against lucidity, from totally lucid down to late stage Alzheimer's. Basically, do those who practice sleeping under the covers suffer from Alzheimer's more than those who don't? Now, this was just a short survey, not comprehensive scientific research, and as such is only meant to indicate whether there is any purpose in going further to more scientifically controlled research. Can the results of this survey be duplicated under more controlled conditions? Did it show a significant relationship? Well, the results did show that there was a progression demonstrating that the more one covers their breathing, the more they suffer Alzheimer's. Comparing groups that do to those who do not practice head covering during sleep, it showed that about 13% of all Alzheimer's were directly caused by this practice. Now that is significant. Does that mean that if everyone stopped that practice, Alzheimer's would be reduced by 13%? I wish it were so. Perhaps. But it's probably not that simple. Now, I believe it certainly will help, but I think more importantly, it begs the question, does what affects this one subgroup also affect the broader group of all those who suffer Alzheimer's? What can we learn from this short survey? Is Alzheimer's caused by a deficiency in oxygen uptake during sleep? Now, I don't have Alzheimer's, at least not yet, but I see that my oxygen saturation level drops a few percentage points during the night. Perhaps for others it drops much more, perhaps to some point where their oxygen saturation is too low to metabolize energy properly. Is it possible that many individuals, while sleeping, have their breathing rate dip to lower levels due to their autonomic system, which may have been set at birth? Or that it is due to their metabolism, which regulates energy use through oxygen, which may have been set at birth? Perhaps sleeping under the covers isn't necessary to suffer Alzheimer's, but only shows that some may enjoy a level of comfort while doing so. What I would be curious to learn is the difference in oxygen levels between those who sleep under the covers and those who don't. And that's very easy to test with current technologies. Are there others who suffer the same drop in oxygen saturation levels, but who do not practice sleeping under the covers? I believe that it's important to try to duplicate my survey, but at a higher level of scientific control, as this information may lead us down a path to a better understanding of Alzheimer's. Could Alzheimer's be related to low oxygen uptake, particularly during sleep? Could low oxygen uptake affect metabolism? Could the accumulation of beta amyloid be caused by anabolic metabolism? So many questions, so many paths still to be investigated and studied. Well, I'm pretty sure you know where I'm going to go with this. Is there a relationship between breathing while sleeping underneath the blankets and learning disabilities? So again, I did a small survey, this time only about 400 submissions, comparing sleeping practices to that of learning disabilities. And again, comparing levels of covering their breathing from totally covered to being totally exposed to fresh air, to different levels of aid needed in school, from being independent to needing some help, to learning in a self-contained classroom as being the neediest. This survey is not meant to be definitive, but to provide direction whether further research would be worth undertaking. And yes, I did find a positive relationship between sleeping underneath the blankets and learning disabilities. Considering those who indicated that they needed help in one area, the data showed that about 13% could be attributed to sleeping under the covers. For those who indicated that they needed help in all areas, that percentage jumped to 22%. For those who were taught in a self-contained classroom, usually indicating a more severe need and identification, that percentage jumped to 34%. So there appears to be a progression. Looking at it another way, through all the different surveys, it appears that overall, in the general population, almost 10% sleep totally covered. When you broaden that to include those that will cover up to about eye level, that jumps to 20 to 25%. When surveying those who were formally identified, either autism, dyslexia, ADD, ADHD, OCD, and others, those identified showed a percentage of sleeping partially or totally at 75%. That's triple the rate of the general population. That is significant. So there does appear to be a relationship a positive relationship between sleeping under the covers and learning disabilities. Do I believe that sleeping under the covers causes learning disabilities? I don't know. I do believe that it weakens learning and educational performance. When you consider the relationship between memory and sleep, how could it not? Should children be encouraged not to sleep underneath the covers? Absolutely. The question is, why are they doing it? Is it just a behavior, learned or otherwise? Or is it a response to something considered in the previous video, their autonomic system or metabolism? Next, is there a link between learning disabilities and Alzheimer's? Depending on which age group is being used, people with learning disabilities are about 3 to 5 times more likely to get Alzheimer's. Why is that? Is sleeping under the covers the link? Or is it what causes some to sleep under the covers? This research is so important, as the solution may be very simple and easy to put into effect. And these solutions may also help those with early onset Alzheimer's, which is considered genetically based. Before I stop talking about sleeping under the covers, it was found that women, more than men, sleep under the covers by about 40% more. Why? I have no idea. But is that the reason why women, more than men, suffer Alzheimer's? Or is it because men, more than women, stay physically active, as exercise has shown to reduce Alzheimer's? A significant concern of mine that has not been tested or even researched is whether pregnant mothers who sleep under the covers result in children who have learning disabilities. Are these women, by sleeping under the covers, depriving their fetus of sufficient oxygen, which results in other outcomes? Or do they just pass on this sleeping behavior onto their children as they permit the practice? Did you know that it has been found that those who have learning disabilities perform better the more they exercise, with some special ed programs integrating workouts into their daily routine? And did you know that exercise is also considered one of the main methods to increase metabolism? Now, exercise is a stimulant, and so is Ritalin, the common drug used to improve those with learning disabilities. So thinking out loud, is stimulation through exercise, stimulation through diet, stimulation through supplements, or stimulants through drugs the cure that will prevent Alzheimer's? And of course, along with avoiding sleeping under the covers. Other questions I have are metabolism and the autonomic system set near birth. Is there a learning function to these that depends on conditions before and just after birth? So I have many questions. My hope is that some young medical researcher will consider the ideas I put forth here worth pursuing. I'm hopeful and optimistic that this research would lead to reduced learning disabilities and reduced Alzheimer's. However, looking for the next best drug may not be the answer. Allow me to use an analogy here. Trying to improve Alzheimer's by removing the beta amyloid is like trying to put out a fire by filtering the smoke. It may help a bit, but not get to the root of the problem. Why is the beta amyloid being produced in the first place? I'm not confident that removing the amyloid will help very much. My hope is that some will get the message about not sleeping under the covers, that it enriches their lives, and that it might even reduce Alzheimer's by as much as just 1%. So time for me to stop talking. I have no product to sell, nor a Patreon account. I don't want anyone's money. However, I would appreciate it if you would give this video a thumbs up or share with someone who you consider may benefit, or make a comment below. Thanks for listening.